South Padre Island is a 34-mile-long barrier reef island located at the southern tip of Texas. Approximately a half-mile wide at its widest point, the island is surrounded by the warm waters of the Laguna Madre Bay on the west and the ocean surf of the Gulf of Mexico on the east. The northern 29 miles of undeveloped beach is covered with natural sand dunes and endless beaches. The southern 5 miles of the island comprise the township of South Padre Island. About 5,000 people live and work on the island, serving hundreds of thousands of tourists during the busy season. The island is linked to the mainland by a 2.5-mile 4-lane bridge named the Queen Isabella Causeway. On September 15th, a tugboat with 4 barges carrying rolled steel hit the bridge just after 1:30 that morning. The lead barge hit the bridge and caused the collapse of 2 80-foot sections of roadway into the bay. 4 young fishermen watched in horror as cars flew off the 80-foot high section and quickly started looking for survivors. The young men rescued 4 survivors from the dark water. By the time the bridge was closed, 8 people lost their lives. Immediately, local officials and the Texas Department of Public Safety mobilized a rescue and recovery operation and established an emergency management command center. Initial concerns centered on a possible terrorist attack. However, as more information became available, these fears were dismissed.
It was still dark, so you couldn't see. So we went up the bridge because we had people on top of the bridge, with people in the water that had already done a preliminary assessment as to what was the damage. But you drive up to the end of that bridge, and we stopped quite a distance away and walked the rest of the way. But all of a sudden, you just see the gap, and you start to realize that that is the only link between the mainland and South Padre Island.
2 bridge sections, a total of 160 feet, had fallen into the bay. TxDOT officials were hopeful that a temporary structure to span across the missing sections might be the answer to connect the island to the mainland. By 6:30 that morning, TxDOT officials, FAR District Engineer Amadeo Saenz, and representatives of Williams Brothers Construction met to assess damage and discuss solutions. The Bridge Division in Austin mobilized the design engineers and dispatched the underwater bridge inspection team. At 9:30 that morning, the bridge design team flew over the accident site. They were devastated to see 2 sections missing from the 4-lane causeway. Shortly after noon, the TxDOT Bridge Inspection Underwater Team arrived and immediately went to work inspecting the bridge. As rescue and recovery operations continued, divers and engineers standing on the structure reported that the structure was unstable and moving. They immediately cleared the area. As a result of damage to the structure caused by the collision, a 3rd section of bridge collapsed, causing more damage to the pilings under the water. The 3rd section collapsed, increasing the gap on the causeway to 240 feet, ending any hopes of using temporary structures for emergency operations. While the recovery operations were still the primary focus, the safety of the recovery team and divers was a concern. Williams Brothers Construction became a partner with TxDOT. With only a good faith agreement, they provided manpower, cranes, and barges to stabilize the adjoining bents, allowing recovery and inspection of the structure to continue. TxDOT divers joined in to inspect and ensure the stability of the structure.
Divers reported it was like a war zone under the surface. There was lots of debris. There was concrete rebar, pieces of the bridge rail, lots of debris in the water. They were very cautious. We were very fortunate that none of our employees got injured in any way, not even a scrape. The divers did a great job. They're very professional in what they do. They went down and through their operations when they were inspecting, they inspected from the bottom of the footing to the mud line, which is about 10 or 12 feet below the surface. under extreme current, very fast currents, and with the debris field that's out there, it was definitely hazardous work.
With rescue and recovery operations underway and being overseen by the Emergency Management Command, TxDOT started looking for solutions to get stranded tourists and residents off the island.
Our first plan was to start in setting up some kind of a ferry operation to move cars across on using our ferries from Port Aransas. We thought of using our ferries from Houston. We very quickly eliminated that because of the amount of draft that was needed for those larger boats. And we started surveying what were the parameters that we needed to work with for the ferry system.
After reviewing emergency contract policies, FAR District Engineer Amadeo Sainz signed contracts activating agreements with 8 passenger ferries. The ferries started operations immediately, carrying between 75 to 200 passengers depending on the size of the boat. School children were granted a ferry boat of their own, which operated at hours that schools required. The Corpus Christi district joined the emergency operations, and by 11:30 that morning, a Port Aransas ferry, the William G. Burnett, with crews and supplies, was dispatched down the intracoastal waterway. Later, the Port Aransas ferry operations would send a second ferry boat, the Mark G. Good, serving as part of the main link to the stranded island. While the ferry boats were on the way, TxDOT maintenance operations started looking for and building landing sites. On the mainland, facilities allowed for ferry boats to come up close to existing moorings. Additional railings and approaches would need to be constructed. On the island side, important environmental issues needed to be addressed before any landing sites could be selected. The Laguna Madre Bay contains protected sea grasses, sea turtles, porpoises, and many fish. All of these concerns had to be taken into consideration. Seagrass areas were marked along the proposed landing sites. These environmentally sensitive areas were also checked to ensure that protected fish and wildlife would not be disrupted.
With everybody working together with our ideas, the people in the valley were excellent. They listened to us, and we asked them, get these landings built to our specifications and to be safe to begin with. That was what we're looking at the whole time, safety-wise. We didn't want to have any accidents, and these people down south did a tremendous job. They got us set up and ready to operate within the three days.
Although TxDOT vehicle ferries started operations by the 3rd day, this would not be enough. Using the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, TxDOT was able to acquire an additional ferry from the North Carolina DOT. A 4th was contracted from a private operator in Mobile, Alabama. All ferry operations had to be certified by the U.S. Coast Guard prior to operations, and all necessary permits were in place. The ferry operations would later include a landing craft that would carry waste, gasoline, and even horses. Once the operations were in place, the travel to and from the mainland became predictable, removing much of the uncertainty. As it became apparent that additional crews would be needed, FAR District maintenance employees stepped forward.
In order to work as a deckhand on a ferry, you need to be Coast Guard approved. And part of the requirements are that you have to have been drug tested recently. So we needed for individuals to volunteer to be drug tested so that we could use them as deckhands. And when we put this memo out to get volunteers to be drug tested, we almost got 100% turnout. All our maintenance folks, all our maintenance sections responded, and it was excellent.
TxDOT also built needed temporary parking and roads to provide staging areas on both the mainland and the island. Emergency contracts were signed with existing transportation systems to get people to and from the People Ferry operations. TxDOT's mission to effectively move people and goods was accomplished by establishing a remarkable, efficient, temporary public transportation system. The system was a lifeline for the island and their entire community. At its peak, the ferry's operation had moved 7,000 vehicles and 25,000 people per week. Recovery operations, as well as inspection of all the bents that had been damaged, continued. The Williams Brothers Construction Company commenced the operation of removing the adjoining sections to ensure the integrity of the structure. Demolition of the underwater pilings, as well as the extraction of the fallen beams and concrete panels, required several weeks of work. The driving of piles over the same bent locations required a modification to the original drawings. As a solution, the piles were rotated 45 degrees and an additional pile in the center was added for more strength. A superplasticizer concrete additive was thoroughly tested to meet or exceed state and federal standards. Under normal conditions, the concrete would need 7 days to cure. However, with the water-reducing agent, the concrete cured in 24 to 48 hours without compromising strength. This allowed the contractor to use 1/3 of the time necessary for normal construction. The priority placed on this project within TxDOT and Williams Brothers Construction allowed all the resources to get the job done and created an environment for innovation from which all parties could benefit.
The whole reason we were down there was because of partnering. If we had not developed the relationship with them 4 years earlier and they did not have trust in us and we did not have trust in them, this would have never happened, and that's what partnering is all about. Williams Brothers worked 40,000 man-hours in 6 weeks without a lost time accident while working in a marine environment and doing underwater demolition. To me, that's unbelievable.
The reconstruction period included good weather, and crews were able to work 3 shifts a day. The contractor and TxDOT were concerned about the amount of time that the bridge would be closed and the economic impact that the closing had on the resort island. The accident had happened during the slow tourist season, but the loss of over 600 jobs and the closing of businesses was devastating, costing an estimated $55 million to the local economy. The temporary transportation system, along with the ferry boat operations, was costing over $80,000 a day. The community made many sacrifices, but people grew to know each other as they rode the ferries. The 30-minute ferry ride became an attraction as well as the primary access to the island. School children appreciated the hard work that was done to complete the causeway. On November 21st, the causeway opened. The project was completed 30 days ahead of schedule and days before Thanksgiving. The miracle was made possible through planning, experience, knowledge, hard work, commitment, decision-making ability, and the willingness to take calculated and necessary risks. The contractor and TxDOT worked together to ensure an environmentally compliant project that would be done in the safest and most efficient manner. But the real accomplishment was giving back to the citizens of South Padre Island and Port Isabel their jobs, their access, their peace of mind, and their Queen Isabella Causeway.